Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Got a nice haircut. Just want to point out to the listeners.
Yeah, I was going to say, I missed you.
Oh, I missed you too. I thought about that. We talked about that a bit on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
It's gone from seeing you and talking to you so much to not very much at all. And then when you're going to be gone.
Yeah. Anywho, on to this week's episode. And when you say gone, I think just for the listeners, I might have mentioned it. I have mentioned it in the It's Not Fair episode that I'm going off to India to do yoga teacher training. And I guess for 3.5 weeks, I won't have to do any cooking or food preparation. This episode came off the back of somebody saying, I hate thinking about food, I hate planning food, I hate shopping for food, I hate cooking food, and I hate clearing up. So I think it's important to kind of talk about all the stuff that's around just the cooking part of it. There's having to make the decisions and the planning part, having to actually get hold of the food, I'm feeling tired just talking about it. Make the food and then clear up after yourself.
Yeah, it is a lot of stuff.
It is a lot of stuff. Have you always liked it?
No. When I started liking it when I had to make it for more people. And I think that that's part of it, right? Like when I was single, I couldn't be bothered. It felt silly for me to make stuff. It felt like too much of an effort for too little reward. And there's something about doing things for other people that makes it feel like, more worthwhile to me. So when I had my oldest daughter, who's now 12, I was very interested in making her baby food. And I suppose this was also a control element, but I was, I made her baby food. I took care to prep it. It was also exciting to watch her discovering new there was a value in it for me. And then preparing dinners and breakfasts and lunches too. And I wasn't working full time. So I had time at home to do that. I had time to go grocery shopping, and also grocery shopping became my time, like me time. So all of that really helped me, I think. But I also come from a family of cooks. So cooking is part of my memories, just my mom and my grandma in the kitchen. And that's just part of my culture, essentially. And just being around it a lot and around people who enjoyed it. So I fell into it, I think, more easily. And I still do enjoy it. And I enjoy food. And I'm not one of those people who said, I wish I never had to eat again. Like it's just too much of a bother. That's not something that I've ever really identified with too much.
Oh, I think I did. Yeah.
I know. I think you've said it.
Yeah. That idea. I didn't want to think about food. I didn't have to deal with food. I didn't want to eat food.
Right.
It was just too much noise. And I wonder as well, like part of the cooking thing, all that leading up to it involves making a lot of decisions.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not in a routine with it. So somebody who's not in the routine of cooking already, then become somebody, I'm turning it into an identity thing, but somebody who cooks is a huge shift. Yeah. It's a shift in mentality. And I think it can be approached in a bit black and white. So I know for me, when I was really in it, eating disorder wise, planning and preparing a food myself, I wouldn't have realized it at the time, but there was an idea in my head about what that should look like. So it would have been protein and vegetables. That's what I thought I should be cooking. So I wonder as well where the black and white thinking comes in. It's like, if I'm not doing these ideal home cooked meals kind of thing, then why bother?
Well, how has that changed for you? So if you're not in the black and white mentality about it now, what does meal prep look like for you today?
It fluctuates. And it's interesting talking about this at this time because I'm now like 3-4 months into being a digital nomad. Yeah. So when I'm going from place to place and I'm in different locations all the time, I'm not in my own kitchen. I'm not in my own environment. And that makes it much, much trickier. That unfamiliarity of it. Different ovens are slightly different, even though the temperatures are supposedly the same.
Yeah, they're different.
All of those kinds of things. So in the second Airbnb I was in New York, I was there for 5 weeks. And what I would call like cooked, as in use the oven cooked, I think it was 4 times in 5 weeks.
I get that when you're not in your own space.
Mm-hmm.
there's even a mentality of, not that you were on vacation, but there's still that sort of like, I would be more inclined to eat out or buy things prepared if I wasn't in my own home. And it's, yeah, for sure. I get that.
And one thing I found is that when I'm actually cooking, I like cooking.
Okay.
I don't like the preparation part. I really don't like going to the grocery store. I'm like that. I hate it.
It's just like my favorite.
Yeah.
I like it.
So I get
so
the
many
recipe.
choices and options.
I get the recipe boxes delivered because they're a bit more expensive, and I appreciate it's not something that everybody necessarily has the means to do regularly. It means because they're more expensive that it gives me the impetus to do it because I really don't want to waste it.
Yeah.
So even though I don't feel like it, and I'm like, I really can't be bothered to cook that meal, or I really don't fancy that thing that I've ordered because I ordered it last week and today I'm not fancying it. It gives me that nudge to get up and do it. And normally once I decided and the conflict's gone and I'm like, okay, I'm doing it, then it's fine. And I don't mind clearing up. That bit doesn't bother me at all.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? So I almost wonder with that expectation idea of it needs to look a certain way, so that if you're using a meal kit, or even the financial expectation that I need to use this and not waste it, or the waste expectation, that's okay. Like if that is the nudge that gets you to do something, then use it. Like to have meals like that. It doesn't have to come from this very like aligned place with cooking or the thing you're making. It doesn't have to look like that. And I'm like that with lunches. So I don't like lunch. It's my least favorite meal. And so it's very rare that I'll be like super excited about a lunch. So that's the one place where I've ordered like the frozen meal type thing. And I'll just be like, oh, I don't know what to have for lunch. I don't have to, oh, right. I have those things. I have to use them. So, okay. And it sort of like gives me permission to not come up with the perfect thing and to be like, maybe it's also a meh meal. And that's fine. That works for me. Whereas for breakfast and dinner, I want to put more thought into it, and I want it to be more satisfying. I have an expectation that those meals should be more satisfying, I think. Not to an extreme degree, but just more so than lunch. So I don't know, even looking at it meal by meal and what works for you meal by meal. I have a client who really struggles also with lunch. And we talked about, she has financial resources to order out. And so she's like, like I end up ordering out, for a lot of things. And so I'm like, well, okay, well, why don't you can do that? And she was kind of like, oh, I thought in intuitive eating, like I should be working away from that and like, figuring out what I want at home. I thought, that was like more of a shortcut. It's like, well, it's okay. And if that's something that works for you, that's okay. If that's what lunches need to look like for you as you're, she's raising kids, she's working from home. It's just easier. It's more practical for her. It gets the job done, and it cuts down on her decision making and her expectation of what she's got to prepare. It doesn't have to look like 3 home cooked meals every day to be some kind of, perfect eater.
What do you think about when it comes to the resistance to it? Because people will say things like, I know that if I was cooking my meals, that it would really help me. It would be really beneficial for me to cook some more of my meals because maybe I'm spending a lot more money on takeouts as well. Yeah. And that's all adding up. But I can't get myself to do it. How would you coach them through that, Stefanie?
You're going to throw that big question at me?
Sure.
I have met several, not many, but I have several clients where that is the issue. And I think there's exploration in that question. It's not just a cut and dry answer. Like what is this resistance about? For example, I have a client who has a resistance around it because it was the expectation of her mother. So she's got this expectation that she's supposed to cook vegetables if she's going to make a meal. And she's got a lot of resistance about vegetables because of the way they were imposed on her as a child. So like exploring, like, what is the resistance really about? Like, what pieces of it? Is it about the cleaning up? Is it about the shopping? Is it about the parts of the meal specifically? That's one possibility. But I think the other part that is resonant for me is resistance of energy. Like when I was depressed in particular. So as an anxious person, cooking is easier because I want to move. I want to do, like, there's a release in it. But when I was depressed, I didn't want to do anything. And I didn't want any more expectation. The thought of getting up, going to the grocery store, deciding what to make, that whole thing, how much energy that takes up. The resistance was about like, no, I can't do all that. Stop expecting. I don't know who I'm talking to, but like, stop expecting me to be able to do all of that day in and day out. No. And that there's a certain amount of respect for that. I think that we will I called myself lazy. I was like, I really thought I was just a good for nothing couch potato who just didn't have it in me to do adult things. There's that mentality comes out in a lot with this conversation, like that you're not adulting well enough. And for sure that was my issue. And there's a compassion piece here for me around respecting the amount of energy you have to do or not do something, and where your nervous system is in that equation. And rather than thinking of it as a character thing, like I'm just too lazy to cook, it's more of a capacity thing. And where's your capacity right now? How much do you have? And that might be not to be making, yes, it might help, right? And yes, it might be, yes, of course. Like in theory, it's kind of like if I would have meals, at home, and if I could cook them, I would be better off. My eating would feel better. But if you don't have the capacity for it, there's the problem. That's an issue. So it's like step by step. Maybe it's about working on compassion for capacity first before you're ever going to get to a place where you're actually able to have the energy and capacity to be doing those things. I think this is a slower process. And I think I think we're getting stuck in the part where we're blaming ourselves and self-loathing for not being able to be that kind of adult,
I agree. That was really well put. So with my resistance to cooking, I have some really quick go-to things, which really helps.
Yeah, let's talk about those. I think that's very helpful. I would love to hear your go-tos.
Yeah, well, have I never told you about my fish and soup?
No, fish and soup?
Yeah.
Definitely not.
What does it sound like?
Fish soup is what I'm picturing.
Not really. So I'd get a breaded piece of cod and I would bake that in the oven.
What do you mean you get it? Do you purchase it breaded already?
Yes.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Goes in the oven. And then I get a really nice kind of hearty soup. One of the fresh ones, but made from the supermarket. I haven't done this in a while. Now I want it. I haven't done it. Anyway, sorry.
You're like planning dinner tonight.
Yeah, nothing. Oh, great. And then I would heat up the fresh soup. So it would often be, they used to do a really great Moroccan chicken one at Tesco, which they don't do anymore. It's changed, but that used to be my go-to one. And I would heat that up, and then you have the bowl of hot soup and you just drop the breaded cod fillet. It's zero effort. It's absolutely zero effort. So the cod goes in, I know, for normally 30 minutes or whatever that takes. And then in the last 5 minutes, you heat up the soup. You put the soup in a bowl. You drop it's normally a really substantial, chunky cod fillet in the soup. Done.
Okay.
Just warming things up. And now, so one of the meals I've got in is like a chicken Kiev. It's a vegetarian one. So it's no chicken Kiev or whatever they call it. And just some new potatoes and some veg. And all that stuff just needs to be heated up.
Okay.
Boom.
Yes,
done.
and viable,
tray bake.
Right?
Love a tray bake. Just chop up carrots, sweet potatoes, mix it up with a bit of seasoning. I like a bit of curry powder, actually, is really nice. Put that in for 10 minutes. Then the red pepper and the red onion. Again, mix it in a bit of oil and curry powder. Put that in, normally with whatever you want your meat or protein to be. And then in the last 10 minutes, you chuck a load of kale on top. So then the kale is really crispy and it's delicious. And it's just chopping and baking.
So when you're going to make something like that, do you have to say like, okay, I need to go get those things? And then you have to go get those things?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's hard. Because, so right now, as we speak, I think I heard the doorbell ring just a minute ago for food delivery, right? So when I buy like so much food for the week, and I buy all this stuff. So it's in-house. And then I decide what I'm making as I go by opening the fridge and being like, what do I have? So that would be something that I'm like, oh, I have some kale. I have some this and that. And if I don't have the specific thing, I would just substitute. But I think that's easier, right? Like when you just buy all the things in the beginning of the week or whatever, and then that's what you're working off of.
Yeah, if I was that
like, I want to make that, but I want to make that, but that means I have to go get that. Yeah.
Yeah, if I was that organized, but it's normally a case of I go to the shop on the day and I just buy that food.
Okay.
So I tend to go to, maybe that's why I hate it so much. I tend to go to the grocery store most days.
I like that. I think that sounds really appealing, but maybe that's because the grass is greener.
Yeah.
See,
I like the idea of a house full of food, and then you just kind of, it's all there and you just need to figure it out as well.
And that's the other thing is that I will put things together. I also don't have picky, that's not true at all, but I was going to say I don't have a picky spouse, which is true. That's true. I have picky kids, but I don't have a picky spouse. So if I mess up, like if I put something together that doesn't really go, or like it didn't turn out so well, he's fine with that. Versus, I don't have the expectation. Like my dad used to complain about my mother's cooking like every night, so it's kind of like, oh, that's a lot of pressure too. But it's kind of like, I can I can throw this together, see what happens. And if it's a fail, no one's going to criticize me for it except my kids, which fine. They're going to criticize me anyway. But I do have specific go-tos. P.S. When you're talking about that fish soup, I'm thinking about it. I can't eat something hot, like warm, without something like afterwards. I'm going to crave a sweet or a crunch. Just P.S.
Yeah. Well, have yourself a sweet and crunch afterwards.
That's what I would do.
I
think I would need to have something after, or fresh even.
That would be more like a lunch, because that often wouldn't be enough for like the one main meal of the day.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Do you remember when I gave you that soup recipe and you procrastinated over trying it?
Yeah.
Because you were, so I wonder sometimes that whole, I don't know how to do this.
Yes.
That learning how to cook or feeling like cooking is this big thing to learn how to do could feel quite daunting if it's not something that you have confidence with.
Yes. And also, I think there's something, I don't know how you feel about this, but the fact that you'd given it to me and I'd eaten it and I knew what was in it and I knew how it tasted. Again, I think we talked about this somewhere. There was an orienting to it. So I knew what I was going to be making versus looking at a recipe that I'd never actually had before. It's different when you can conceptualize what you're doing. You know what I mean? And so when I look at a recipe, I'm like, that looks good in the picture, but I've never actually experienced it before. To me, that's a lot harder than I've eaten it. I know what this is. I know what this tastes like. I know what to expect. I'm going to go replicate. Even though it did take me a bit longer. I've sat with recipes cut out of magazines before or, printed off of Pinterest that have just sat that I've never actually made because I have never actually had them before. And so there's something to me about eating something and then replicating that thing like as a more, I think that's an easier approach versus just picking willy-nilly. Although for some people, I'm sure that works, but for me, it's just harder.
How you imagined it to be. I'm making that up.
You're making that up. You did think that the first time, and I said no. Your brain.
You
need
to tell me again, Steph. I need to hear it a couple of times.
No, it was simply no. It wasn't that I wouldn't, because again, I wouldn't be if I didn't make it the way you did. I'd be like, oh well, can't wait to go back to London.
I thought you said that you were worried about trying it because it wasn't, in case it wasn't like.
Sometimes it's just the idea of it, right? Like I got to get all those ingredients in my house on purpose. And there's something about the intention versus like, I like the freedom of I'm just going to order a whole bunch of things that are on sale this week and that are, and they're in my, and now I'm going to make something of it versus nope, I have to get lentils and I have to get that kind of tomato sauce and I have to get those potatoes. Like that's intentional. And that means I have to be like paying attention to something when I'm ordering. Like that part is more, that's an extra step that I'm not willing to take all the time. I'm just like, nope, I'm just going to order what I order and whatever it is, It was more that. It was more like, I have to be intentional about this.
If you would like to come and connect with us in person, we're going to be in Dublin on Saturday, the 16th of September, 2023. We're going to be teaming up with the Intuitive Eating Hub for a workshop, followed by a social at a local Irish pub. We would love to meet you and hope you can join us.
And don't forget, you can still join our community of listeners by signing up on Patreon for access to monthly support calls, an active private Facebook group, and regular Ask Us Anything bonus calls. Links for Dublin and for the community are in the show notes.
Why would somebody want to try to start cooking if it's not something that they're naturally interested in?
Finances, nutrition. I think this idea of being an adult comes up. Health. In my air quotes, and not necessarily in air quotes, but I think that's a factor, to name a few. What do you think?
I mean, I agree, and I'm wondering what might make that easier for someone. You know what it's like? It's the whole thing that we've spoken before. It's like, I know this thing will help me if I can do this thing. There are benefits to doing this thing, but I'm really struggling to get myself to do the thing. There's so many like obstacles and steps to something like this if it's something that there's a resistance to.
Yes. Well, again, the capacity thing comes up for me. So if there's a capacity issue, I think that is first. But let's say that's not the case. Let's say, or it is the case, but not all of the case. There's something about this process that if you're not already in a routine of cooking, it has to be intentional. And sometimes it just takes me naming that. Like, it isn't going to just happen. Right. So there is a certain amount of energy you have to collect to do it. And it's okay to be intentional. That's the other thing, is that it feels diety, because typically in diet days, that's when we were intentional about it. We would meal prep on Sundays, or, you would make the recipes or whatever and order the right foods in your house or whatever that might be. And so there's an energy of that I think we can have resistance to. And so in my gentle nutrition course, the whole thing is about, it's okay that if cooking would help you in, or if it's something you want to bring in at least partially, it's okay to make a grocery list and to go get those things and to actually prepare a meal, or to meal prep itself. That's something that doesn't have to be related to, it's not only available to dieters, but it might bring up some scarcity in the body as you go through it, because the only experience of that might have been when you were dieting, because it was like very black. For me, it was black and white. It was like, if I was meal prepping, I was dieting. And if I was not dieting, I was binging, and there was no prep. You know what I mean? So it was one or the other. So when you return to something, it's very like, oh, this feels like it did when I dieted. This is only something I know when I was restricting, or being good, or like having that mentality. So aligning with the intention of like, I'm doing this for different reasons now, and this feels scary, but I'm doing this intentionally. You can give yourself permission to do that on a smaller scale. I'll have clients work on like, do this once between this session and next, if you want. You know what I mean? Not, okay, we're going to now have Sunday meal prep. You know what I mean? Like, just try to just dabble, make it low energy, low expect, like just make it casual. Take the edge off of it.
There was one time when I'd been in a meta binge, probably for a couple of weeks. And I remember one morning getting up and making myself scrambled egg on toast, and realizing that this was the first food I'd prepared for myself, probably in a couple of weeks, and feeling like I just climbed a mountain, not because it felt really difficult, but because I just felt, it sounds really dramatic. Maybe, hopefully our listeners will get it. I felt victorious, like I had just done something really big, really huge for myself. And so there's a difference between cooking or preparing food for yourself because you think like, this is the best thing, I'm doing the best thing, this is what I should be doing.
Right.
Versus in that moment, it was like a real possibility of looking after myself a little bit.
Yeah.
With food. And this idea of cooking can often be thought of as it's this big meal with all these ingredients. But making scrambled eggs,
Yeah.
that's cooking. Boiling an egg is cooking. It's just, I guess, consciously or intentionally putting a plate of food together.
Yes. Even plating it.
Yeah.
Plating versus eating it out of the bag or out of the container. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's not necessarily cooking, but it's preparing.
Yeah. My breakfast is just cutting things up and arranging it on a plate. That is the preparation of my breakfast, and it takes about 90
What do you have?
seconds. So at the moment, I'm doing that. I've told you, my oat cakes.
Yeah.
With hummus.
Yeah. That's right. Yes.
And cucumber.
Oh, yeah.
And carrot.
That.
And a yogurt and a piece of fruit. It's like it's a breakfast picnic.
I like that. And I think you're making a really good point around it can just be that, right? Like arranging and having it versus grazing around, which is what I was going to talk about. I think that some resistance I used to have about preparing food or cooking food was that I knew that the second I got into the kitchen, I would start eating anyway. Like I would start eating as I was preparing. And so if I was boiling water to make myself something, or even scrambling eggs and waiting for them to heat, while that was in the pan, I was going to be back and forth to the fridge or to the pantry. And then I was like, I couldn't wait for that meal to be prepared. And then it was like, when it was prepared, it was like, well, now I've already started the binge, so I don't even want this anymore, because now I just want to go for the fun foods. You know what I mean? That was a big thing. Like being around food itself was like, that's opening a floodgate. I don't have time for that. So to your point, I wonder if like a stepping stone, I mean, I wish I thought of this earlier. I don't know how it would have gone, but to like, be like, okay, grabbing the ready, the yogurt on the plate, the apple, and not even cutting it, not even just getting it on a plate, and then being like, okay, now that's it. That's all the expectation is. I don't even have to wait for something to heat or cook it any longer than that. Just the ready to goes on a plate, making that much intention around it so that there isn't even time to binge in the meantime.
Yeah, and taking into time factor as well, because I think sometimes we can have this expectation of ourselves that's just not, it doesn't match up with the experience of ourselves. So if you're saying to yourself, oh, when I get home from work at 6:30 and I left the house at 6:30 in the morning, I am going to spend 45 minutes cooking a meal. And each time you think that that is something you should be able to do, but every day you come in from work and you are absolutely exhausted, and what your body needs is to rest. I think there's something about anticipating that version of ourselves compared to the peppy version in the morning saying, "This is what I'm gonna do," or the person
Yeah.
after a binge who's saying, "I'm gonna become this different person around food now, and this is how I'm gonna do it." That
Yeah.
expectations, unrealistic expectations that we set and don't recognize, or maybe think that we should just be able to do it all. I do feel like I could have, like, in New York, I could have done, and this I could have done better with, like, preparing food. I really could have, and I couldn't have, and, like, both of those things are true
Yeah.
because the
Well,
food was weird and expensive. And it was just
also,
difficult.
you would have had to be more if it wasn't a default thing for you, you would have had to be more intentional about it, and I think you were being intentional about other things when you were here. You know what I mean? Like, food prep wasn't the thing that you were like, "I'm coming to New York so I can make some meals in that Airbnb kitchen." You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't your goal. So, unless it was part of your goal, it would have, you know what I mean? Like, you would have had to gather energy around it. You were like, "I wanna go to meetups and do these things." Like, that was where your focus was. Unless it wasn't, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But it's kind of like understanding where you were and what the context of your life was at that time. Sure, in retrospect, we would all wish to be perfect humans who do all the things all the time, but we have priorities.
Yes. And there's still a voice in my head that's going, "Yeah, but you could have done better than 4 times in 5 weeks." And that can be true, and that can also be okay that
Yeah,
that's true as
exactly.
well. Like,
Yeah, then fine.
yeah.
Grieve that a little.
I agree a little bit.
I also think the more you cook, the more you cook. So, and I'm real. That's not a. I mean that. So the more that I start cooking, the more like those meals get things under your belt, right? So then they become your go-tos and they become easier to do. So you're more likely to be able to repeat them and have more capacity to repeat them because you know what you need to do. There's a familiarity to it. And that matters as far as, because when I wasn't cooking at all, I was like, I don't know. I don't even know what to make. I don't know how to think about what to make. I don't know. Can't even picture myself doing it. And then the more you would do it, it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. I have these meals that I can make. And that's all it has to be. And also, I think we have this idea of like such a huge variety of recipes. And really, I think when you come down to anyone's kitchen who does cook, there's go-tos. There's things that you typically make. And like my mom is a cook, right? She cooked for us and she still cooks for us, but she makes this, like she doesn't make always the same thing, but the same kind of things all the time. You know what I mean? Just over and over in her different variations of it. But because she's so familiar, we can't actually be, I mean, maybe we could, but we'd have to be very intentional about it, about buying someone who makes Indian dishes and Italian dishes and Greek dishes and like all the different types of things you could make all the time, varying it up. I buy similar groceries week to week, similar types of things, and then I make different variations of similar type of meals. It isn't like, you know what I mean? I think when we picture people cooking, we're imagining that they're 5-star chefs.
Mhm.
And unless you're a 5-star chef, you're probably not doing that because it has to be somewhat easy. It has to be somewhat familiar. So giving yourself the grace of saying, I make similar things every week is fine. Like that's okay. It doesn't have to be any different than that.
One of my Bournemouth friends, it's a bit of a running joke in our circle, she has exactly the same thing for dinner on each day of the week.
Yeah.
So Monday is always whatever, I can't remember what any of them are. And, yeah, she's been doing that for about 3 years, and she seems perfectly happy with that.
Just the
Just,
same meal? Yeah. I mean, then you could cry. There can be disorder too in that. And I've worked with a client who said it's hard for me to do that because I've been trying to get away from my safe foods, right? So there's a difference between safe foods and ease and familiarity. And I think the energy you're bringing to it matters. I rotate. So for years, I had pretty similar breakfasts, eggs, and I've recently switched it up. Now I'm having overnight oats. Like I'm actually preparing the oats earlier in the week, which is something I never would do. But now I'm doing that, and I'm sure I'll switch again. But I have very similar, like I don't know, like I don't know what I'm having for dinner tonight, but I got it. Like I said, I got my grocery order. It just came in, and I'm imagining that I'm going to probably have corn on the cob because I have the corn, a protein. So I think I brought chicken, so I might make some chicken just easily. I might just like bake it in the oven, or my husband might grill it with like a dressing marinade on it. And green beans or a salad or one of the vegetables that I've got. Just, yeah, like boom, boom, boom. Protein, carbohydrate, vegetable. And then I'll have some cookies after. Like I'm probably like, it's just a matter of like the parts of the meal and which ones I've got and put them together.
Where's your complex carbs, Steph?
Well, corn would be the carb in that one. Or yeah, because it's a starch. I mean, I don't always have I mean, like most times, like I'll have rice or something like that. But if I'm just going boom, 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 that's probably what it will be.
Okay. It's all right. Just
Yeah.
asked.
I mean, it's not always like it's not. That's what it'll be tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. And another night I might be like, oh, sometimes I'll take like ground turkey or something like that, and I'll make it up and I'll put some stir fry veggies in there, and then put some potatoes in there or some rice in there, and it's just like a big mosh, and we'll just have that.
You tend to be the decider.
Yeah, because I'm the one making it, so it's going to be what works for me. And sometimes it's got to be faster than other times. I mean, I will ask for input. Sometimes I'm like, oh, what do you guys want tonight? So it's inevitably mac and cheese. I want to order out. It's like too many cooks in the kitchen. And it's like, well, then I'm just going to be the one deciding because your input is not valid here. If they could agree, I would be much more inclined. And that's what my mom used to say. She used to say, she got such burnout of deciding what to make. So I remember when we were teenagers, she got to a point where she was like, tell me what to make. Tell me. That's all she wanted to know is what it was so she could then go execute it. Because again, the addition of the decision is just too much. Like, it's like, I can either do it or decide it, but one or the other. And I get that. It's a lot of energy to do both.
And she meant it if you decided she would do it?
Yeah, I mean, within reason. Because again, as teenagers, we weren't asking for, like, my kids they still don't conceptualize how much time something takes or the practicality of it. But when we, as they get older and as we got older, it was more like we could understand that. So it was kind of like, oh, will you make this? And then my sister would be like, yeah, I like that, and it would be easier for her to be like, okay, great, fine. And we also got to know what her go-tos were. So we would request those because we knew that she could make them. Mm-hmm. We still do that. I just got home from a weekend at my parents', and usually every time we go, I'm like, Mom, will you make? Mom, will you make? And she's like, great, yeah. Like, keep them coming because then she doesn't have to think about it. But she enjoys the cooking process.
So it's the decision making and the planning that's the hard part.
Yeah, that's the part she doesn't like. And I remember I used to be the one to unpack the groceries for her, and eventually going to get them. I go and I'll get them now. Take the load off of her in that way. Divvying up responsibility is helpful.
So just one other thing that I do, and that anybody else who is usually cooking for yourself, when I get the Gusto boxes, I cook 2 meals and I have the next one the next day. So if I cook, I often will cook 2 meals and then I've got leftovers, which will be a meal for the next day. So then you're only cooking once.
That's a good strategy. Want me to tell you something I just made for the first time over the weekend that I really like, and I will be making it again? Okay.
No, I don't want to know. Okay.
Well, see you all next time.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Well, now I'm not going to tell you.
How do you know I was going to ask? I was about to ask, and well, I wasn't going to ask anyway.
Well, I'm going to tell you, listeners. Sarah doesn't have to listen.
No, we've ended it. That's where the episode ends.
No, because I do the edit. I'm the one who puts it on Libsyn. So.
Yeah, but if I get rid of this and shut the outro on, you ain't going to find it again. You can't do the outro.
Hey, Ken, the volume will just be off. Don't test me, Sarah. You know I've got an inner rebel.
Yeah, you're feisty today.
You do too. No, my daughter turned 6 on Monday. And we were with the family, and so we have like birthday parties. It's their request, what they want. She wanted sushi, so she likes the avocado and cucumber sushi. And I was like, well, on one hand, that's great because I could just order it, but also it's super expensive to order for that many people. So I was like, we'll get some sushi, but I'm gonna make some other things along the Japanese theme. So I made it was more of an Asian themed meal, and I made this crunchy cabbage slaw. So it was basically shredded cabbage, which I bought pre-shredded. It was like a Napa cabbage. It was soft. Dump that in a bowl, sliced up some scallions, the green onions for the crunch factor, bought slivered almonds. So they were already slivered for me, put those in, and some sliced pepper, like red pepper. And I bought shredded carrots as well. So a lot of this was pre-shredded, and popped it in a bowl and bought the marinade. I didn't even want to make the marinade myself, or bought the dressing. Ginger sesame? Yeah, ginger sesame, and put it all together. So I really didn't make anything. I just put things together in a bowl. And it was so good, to the point where like I made so much of it, and it went, like the whole thing went, and everybody ate it, including the kids. So I bought, that's what I just ordered. I ordered some more ingredients to make that again. Delicious.
Such a shame that the listeners aren't going to get to hear that.
Stop. I feel so unheard. You're igniting my complexes, Sarah.
It does sound, that's my favorite kind of dressing, actually, is the whole ginger, sesame, soy, those kind of flavors.
Well, there you go. And I went the shortcut. I did have a little guilt, by the way, about not making it myself, like not preparing the dressing myself. Like I should do that. But then I was like, no, I give myself permission not to. And it was fantastic and good. And we got our slaw, and we had sushi too. It was good. Okay. Thank you all for listening.